If there's one thing I think all of us parents need more of, I know I definitely do, and I know every listener listening to this podcast does, and that is more self-compassion. I think if you've been a parent for of any time, you know being a parent is a really good way to beat yourself up for all the mistakes you've made and all the ways you're not doing it perfectly or the way in which you intended. So that's why today we're so excited to introduce you to our interview with Diana Yoakley. And she's also a peaceful parenting coach, but one of her main passions is self-compassion and teaching parents the importance of that. If you want to be a parent who's not yelling as much, who's not having anger or shame or all those things kind of dominate your parenting day to day, self-compassion is the key. So she's going to give you 3 specific steps to help you today have more compassion for yourself. And definitely stay till the end, because we're going to talk about an exciting summit that we are joining with her called the Intentional Life and Parenting Summit. It's coming up in October. It's all going to be for free, but she'll give you more details at the end. So wait till the end to find out how to join that summit. Now, please take a moment before you jump in the interview to pause, leave us a review, put some comments there, especially 5-star ones that are really positive. We'd love to get the word out about the podcast so more and more people have a chance to listen to it. And so I definitely think you're going to enjoy this podcast and get so much out of it. So have a great time listening.
Welcome to the Art of Raising Humans.
The Art of Raising Humans is a podcast designed to support, equip, and encourage parents on how to create long-lasting, deeply connected relationships with their kids that's free from fear and shame. Come join us on the journey. Hello, and welcome to The Art of Raising Humans. I'm Kyle.
Hi, I'm Sarah.
And Sarah, we've got a great opportunity to be on a summit coming up in October, know?
Very excited.
And so we're really excited to have our guest who's hosting that summit. Mm-hmm. It's called Intentional Life and Parenting Summit, and it's going to be in October. And something that our guest, Diana, is really good at talking about is something I think every parent wants to talk more about or needs to hear more about. Mm-hmm. And that is self-compassion. So without further ado, I want to say welcome, Diana. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
And so, Diana, I know we have a connection because you've also been personally trained by Dr. Laura Markham as well. And you are also a peaceful parenting coach, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. And I'm sure that was a great experience and you learned a lot from Markham, but she's great at self-compassion too, wouldn't you say?
Yes. She definitely embodies that empathy for self, which is that like unconditional self-regard, which is self-compassion. So I've been really blessed to be able to study under her and begin this journey of learning how to be more kind to ourselves as parents.
Why did you get into this work of doing self-compassion? Why are you so passionate about that?
Yeah, so in peaceful parenting, we have the 3 big ideas, right? So we have self-regulation, connection, and coaching versus controlling. And I think self-regulation, the first step, is the hardest for parents in general. Most of us struggle with, we hear these great strategies in parenting and great solutions to challenging situations, but then we get stuck in implementation. And one of the biggest barriers parents get stuck in is they're not able to stay calm enough to be able to pull up that wisdom that they learned, right? The skills that they practiced when they were calm. It works great when you're calm, but when something is happening with kids and it's stressful or you're triggered, it can be really hard to use these amazing tools of connection and coaching. And so in order to be effective in overall peaceful parenting, self-regulation is key. And I found that self-compassion is really a foundational element of self-regulation. Some experts would say that self-compassion is like reparenting. And if we know anything about self-regulation, is that we need co-regulation to learn self-regulation. And self-compassion is like an adult way to learn to co-regulate with yourself. If you didn't have that experience as a child, you can give that to yourself today. It's almost like when you think about attachment, secure attachment. If you didn't have it as a child, you can have earned secure attachment as an adult. You just have to do practices and healing and go into relationships that provide that to you. But with self-compassion, you can begin this journey by giving that to yourself, which is pretty cool when I found these resources.
Yeah.
So, okay. I think maybe we have some people who understand all of that and maybe we don't. Can you real quick fill us in what is a secure attachment? And just brief, well, I know that can be a whole topic in itself, but then what does it look like to be giving yourself that co-regulation and self-compassion? What does that look like?
Yeah, definitely. So we know with the latest science on raising children and children's brain development that secure attachment is basically like if you're going to do anything for your kid, do this one thing to ensure
Yes.
like resiliency in their life overall, all factors of their life. It's all founded on the foundation of secure attachment, which basically has these four elements of the child feeling safe, seen, soothed, and secure in relationship with at least one caregiver during their early childhood. So these experiences of feeling safe and soothed when you're upset, secure that your primary caregiver won't be the source of threat and fear for you, and seen, like delighting in your child, or
Yeah.
I want to know what you have to say. It's important to me. Tell me what you were thinking. Share with me. I hear you. These experiences all, if the child has these experiences in childhood, that will result in a secure attachment. And attachment varies by provider. So we have multiple attachments in childhood. Some could be secure, some could be insecure. It just depends on the relationship we have with each caregiver. But if we don't have these experiences of feeling safe, so let's say we have big emotions as a child, we feel disappointed about something, and our parents aren't able to give us that compassionate space, and we feel like we were left alone with our big emotions as a repeated experience. If this happens on a repeated experience, or maybe we felt like the parent was a source of unreliable compassion, right? Like sometimes they were compassionate, but sometimes they weren't. Or maybe they were the source of fear. Maybe we were afraid of our parents, and this would be extreme cases like, if maybe they were like an alcoholic, or they were abusive in some way. That would be the parent is a source of fear. Although we know that many parents have a hard time regulating and maybe they end up losing it at their kid, those children will sometimes feel safe with the parent, but sometimes not. And so there's this resistant pattern of like, I don't know if I can trust you this time. How are you going to show
Well, it's
up?
confusing for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so let's say we grew up in an environment like that. We basically concluded that we weren't able to show our parents all of our emotions because they couldn't handle them. And so we repressed some emotions, and we built some skillful patterns in childhood of repression, which were really helpful so that we wouldn't irritate our caregiver and we wouldn't cause more we wouldn't cause more rifts in the relationship in our childhood. And it was helpful back then. But now when we're the parent, it can be really hard to show up for our children when they have those big emotions, because we don't have the skills to complete the cycle of like big emotions and then compassionate emotion coaching. And so that's kind of secure attachment background. But self-compassion has the ability for us to reparent the way that we operate with this cycle. So it gives us an opportunity to show up as that compassionate parent for ourselves today that we didn't have in childhood. And this is something that we do as an inside job, which is really amazing. The research on self-compassion finds that everyone has a self-compassionate part. When we think about like our emotions are kind of like different parts of us, and we have maybe an angry part or a sad part, like some basic emotions, but like all the emotions, like jealous, right? Whatever. There's also a self-compassionate part in there, which is kind of like your wise adult compassionate parent. And we have to kind of wake up this self-compassionate part if it's not a predominant part that comes into how we treat ourselves when we slip up in parenting, when we make mistakes, when we lose it, when our kid seems to do something that triggers us, but really it's like an old childhood trigger. We can rewire that circuit and give ourselves the compassion that we didn't get in childhood today and have a different outcome in our experience today. And over time, we can change the pattern and rewire our brain to be more empathic to our children and more peaceful as a parent, if we can become more peaceful and empathic to ourselves, because we can only give our kids what we have inside. And I can go more into details about the technical elements of self-compassion, but just kind of wanted to
Yeah.
pause there
No,
for a minute.
That's great. Yeah, that was a
and
really beautiful description.
I would say, Diana, the self-compassionate person in me, I think, was really tiny. It was really small. And so tying it into the ability to be calm and composed with your kid, I think was a huge insight into me whenever I was working with Dr. Markham and really working with my kids is I found like what I was trying to do was not be mad. I was trying not to yell. And I found myself, I thought, okay, the way I'll fix that is by just saying I'm sorry after every time I mess up, right? But then I noticed I was saying I'm sorry like every day. And then I remember my oldest daughter, who's now 14, she at one point just said, Dad, I really appreciate that you always follow up and apologize, but why don't you just change it? And then I was realizing like, man, the steps I'm taking, it's not really changing it. And I realized when I listened to my internal dialogue after every time I messed up, oh my gosh, there was so much anger at myself. And I was so just pissed off at my inability to grow up and just do it differently, And I realized all that language was definitely probably the language my parents had used in their own internal dialogue or the ways in which my dad interacted with me. And so I realized that actually this little person in me, the self-compassion part, that's what I needed to focus on. I didn't need to focus on stopping yelling. I didn't need to focus on stop being mad. My focus was actually to love and accept myself better instead of beating myself up after every mistake. I needed to be more comfortable with being imperfect. I needed to be more comfortable with messing up. And it almost seems like, well, if you do that, you're giving yourself an excuse then to just be a mess up and to
you're
yell.
just letting yourself off the hook.
Whereas really the opposite was happening. It was actually giving me the power then to change it. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yes, such a beautiful summary. And for the audience listening to this podcast, if they're familiar with peaceful parenting, right, and emotion coaching our kids, being compassionate with ourselves is essentially, to me, like the way that you would emotion coach a child. And it was interesting as you were talking about, like, if I have these big feelings and now I'm being self-compassionate, letting myself off the hook, that's almost like saying with a child, my child is so angry and so like they're raging. And if I don't nip this in the bud, it's like I'm letting them off the hook. Yet we know, based on child development and the research on the best parenting outcomes, when children's emotions are accepted, validated, empathized with, safety is created with the parent showing up as compassion. These emotions the child is experiencing are like information and messages. They want to be delivered, and then they will begin to evaporate if there's a compassionate presence. But if we don't let this kid get away with it, we're actually just trapping these emotions of rage and anger inside the child's body and saying, it's too scary for me to handle, and I'm not going to let you get away with this. So we're going to actually trap it into your body, and you're going to have to reparent yourself when you're older, right? So again, like, it makes no sense, but it's so simple to kind of reframe. Like, if parents are used to like giving their kid empathy, validation, compassion, and they see the outcome of their work, which is the child is able to behave better, they're able to cooperate more, their emotions lower in intensity and lessen in frequency. The same is true when we find ourselves yelling, triggered. We have to give ourselves that compassionate space of empathy, validation, and welcoming all of our emotions, not all of our behavior. So we put limits on when we feel like yelling at somebody. It's like, can I put some limits around that, but still express my frustration? Like, there's nothing wrong with anger. There's nothing wrong with rage. Something is so wrong that you feel this urgent need to express it. But can we do that without attacking the other person?
Yeah.
Can we express our anger with more love and nonviolent communication also?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely was more, it's really easy for me to store everything inside and just keep going along. And that's, I know even as a child, it was like, okay, just stuff that down there, stuff that over here, and be good,
Yeah.
And so I find even as a parent, I will stuff and stuff and stuff. And then sometimes it starts leaking out everywhere. You can only do that for so long before it starts coming out. And when I started practicing more self-compassion, there's this just release that happens inside of you. and you'll feel so, it kind of helped me then even provide it more to my child, because I would feel what that felt like internally.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that I was like, okay, now I can just be a big old mess if I want to be. Going back to what you're saying, it wasn't now I can behave
Indulgent.
poorly, yes, but
Yeah.
it was so soothing that those feelings would melt away,
Yeah.
and then I could proceed on to be more of the way I wanted to be and interact the way I wanted to act. And it was just amazing to experience that and then think, oh, that's kind of what would happen. That's what's happening with my child when I can accept their gigantic feelings, because you do feel, oh no, if I do this, they're just going to do it again next time.
Yep.
Next time they really want that toy at the store and have a big old meltdown. If I don't stop this, they're going to do that again next time. You're always kind of concerned about that, but it was amazing to watch how it melts away. And I remember holding my child when she'd have really big upset feelings, and then feeling that switch in her when she would just sort of relax.
Yeah.
And but I feel like it took a bit to figure out how to do self-compassion. How do you begin to do that? Or how do you describe that to parents? This is what it can look like. These are some things you can do to put this in practice.
Yeah. So just like there's like this myth that self-compassion is like selfish or self-indulgent, there's also a bit of a myth around we do self-compassion so we can feel happy. Although that, like, long term, you actually get relief from self-compassion. Ultimately, we do it to get relief, but not necessarily like flippant self-compassion so you can get joy and happiness right away. The place to use, so if you think about self-compassion as a medicine, the place to use the medicine, like the appropriate diagnosis for this treatment is when you're suffering. So often big uncomfortable emotions, which express themselves in our body, present as discomfort in our bodies. That's why, and our bodies are like the vessel that our emotions come through. And so when we feel triggered, or when our kid has big emotions, our mirror neurons are picking that up and we feel their big emotions and it feels uncomfortable in our bodies. And so self-compassion comes in as an ailment for that discomfort that we feel. It doesn't make it go away per se in this moment, but it makes it feel better. So it's an application to suffering, and there's plenty of suffering in parenting, right? The challenges of raising children, because it's such an it's such emotionally emotional love labor, right? And I'll give you the three kind of frameworks of self-compassion, but think of this example. So let's imagine, and we know from research that when children have big emotions, when we have big emotions, it registers in our brain as actual pain. So it's no different than physical pain. So a child skins their knee and they have a bloody knee and it hurts. That's physical pain. That's the same as when they feel really, really disappointed about something, depending on the intensity of the emotion, but it registers as a physical pain. So if you imagine a child that's having these big feelings, or imagine yourself as having these big triggers, or you feel like you feel so angry and irritated. Imagine like a child that has a fever. The child wakes up in the middle of the night, they have a fever and they're just burning up, and you will give them medicine for the fever, but it doesn't work like this. The child still is going to be uncomfortable for the next maybe 20, 30 minutes until the medicine kicks in. So what do we do then in that time period when they wake up in the middle of the night and they have like the flu or whatever, and they're feeling so uncomfortable in their body, they're experiencing physical discomfort? What is our instinct in parenting if we're compassionate? Our instinct is to soften, soothe the child, create safety, security, show them that they feel seen, right? So we are like the self-compassion ailment to the child when they're in physical pain. So I want you to kind of think about when we're experiencing the same thing, we want to give ourselves that same compassion we would give a child that has a fever. And the thing is, like, our compassion to our child isn't going to make the fever go away. The medicine will, right? But what it will do is help the child while they're in this state of suffering. It's going to help them feel more like they can handle it more.
Yes.
So we're supporting them in not feeling alone. I'm right here with you. You're okay.
Yeah.
I know this feels really bad. What can I do to help you right now? I'm gonna give you medicine. Maybe I can give you a washcloth to cool off your head. Maybe we can, I don't know, if they take like a lukewarm bath or whatever, or like if they need a breathing treatment, if they're having a hard time breathing, whatever it is. But we're doing these things that are, first of all, mindfulness. This is the first element. Mindfulness with self-compassion is like, this is really hard right now. We're not pretending like it's not. This really stinks. Waking up with a fever at midnight. It feels horrible. You feel discomfort in your body. You feel tingling, like your head hurts. It's throbbing. This is no fun. This really hurts. So in parenting, when we're feeling triggered, it's like, this is really hard for me right now. These kids are fighting constantly. I can't handle it. I'm so overwhelmed. I've got so much on my plate. Like, this is really a moment of suffering. It feels so overwhelming to me. So acknowledging that mindfully, this is what's happening. We're not repressing the emotion. So again, this is the opposite of repression, but it's also not like blowing up the emotion, like dramatically, like it's an emergency. Like I'm so overwhelmed. It's an emergency. It's more like, this is really hard right now. Like your kid wakes up with a fever. It's not like they're bleeding out. You're like, okay, this feels really bad right now. I know this is not fun, right? So mindfulness. Because if we're not mindful of what's happening, we don't know what the next step is. Like we don't know where we're going. Like where are we going from here if we don't know where we're at? So mindfulness is the first step. Then the second step is this common humanity. So we know that when we feel like triggered, we often we're feeling threatened. And this sense of threat is like, I could die, right? Like fight or flight, threat, predator is going to get me, I'm going to die. What gets tangled up in that is this statement of like, I'm all alone. We're designed to live in community. We're designed to live in social settings because in nature, if we were out on our own, we would get attacked by predators and we would die. So we have this constant thing in our heads, like, I'm the only one, this only happens to me, I'm all alone. And what does that make me feel like? I'm at risk for attack by predator. It's just our outdated system, right? Like our amygdala is like, if you're all alone, you'll be cast out by the group. You don't belong in society. Nobody likes you. Shame, shame, shame. And now you're going to die. Because if you feel extreme emotions of shame over time, you basically feel like the other people don't like you and you could die because you have no back. Nobody's got your back, which is a sense of threat. And so self-compassion involves this other people feel like this too. This is really hard for everyone. Parenting feels hard because it is hard. People don't always talk about it, but they feel it in their homes. If you were to look into their homes, you'd realize other people have kids waking up at midnight with a fever too.
Yes, I know.
Or everyone has a fever sometimes, telling your kid, I know, I hate being sick too. I've been sick like this too, and it doesn't feel good. You're not the only one. Other people have felt like this before too. So we're really tapping into this, this sense of threat. By the antidote is common humanity. You belong. And it also minimizes shame, because often when we feel like we've made a parenting mistake and we're no good at parenting and we should just whose idea was this anyway? It's this feelings of shame. They can overcome us. And then it just perpetuates the cycle of lashing out at the child because we don't like feeling shame. And so instead of suppressing shame, let's give it compassion. You're not the only one. Everyone feels like this sometimes. Self-compassion is a perfect antidote to shame. And then the third element of self-compassion, then I'll pause because I know it's a lot. The third element is kindness. And so it's it would be really brutal to be mindful of what's happening without a sense of kindness. So maybe other people feel like this and maybe we're mindful about how uncomfortable it is. But if there's no kind tenderness around it, it's man, this really stinks. And this is this is brutal. There's no softening. There's no soothing. So the kindness is kind of soothing. And there's a question that in self-compassion they always propose, and we should propose to ourselves, is what can I do now to support myself? Just like you would with your child. What would feel better? Do you want a cough drop? Do you want a spoonful of honey? How about some warm tea? It's not going to make the fever go away instantly. We know that, but it will help them feel better because of this kind, something is a little soothing, right? Maybe a cuddle. Maybe if you just cuddle up to me so that I'm not scared and alone, or it's like the intention to be kind. And so we can do the same thing with ourselves. How can I be kind to myself right now? And often what's suggested in self-compassion, well, there's two things really. One is the inner dialogue. So parents will often be like, well, who has time to do self-compassion? I already have a bazillion things on my to-do list. But the thing you can always reframe is how you talk to yourself in your head, because you're always doing that anyway. And like out of the 80,000 thoughts we have every day, or 60,000, 70-80% of them are negative. And so that's our negativity bias. So can we reframe how we're even dialoguing with ourselves? Because if we can say something like, oh my goodness, this is really hard, I'm really struggling, and I know I'm not the only one, like I'm really doing my best, like I'm trying to do my best, but sometimes it doesn't feel like it's good enough, and I'm on my own side. Like, can we kind of give ourselves some kind words and not beat ourselves up intentionally? And this takes practice, obviously. And then the other piece of that kindness is like a soothing touch. So research shows that we release oxytocin when we give ourselves soothing touch. And we also release oxytocin if somebody hugs us. So if your child was upset, you give them a hug, they're going to be flooded with more oxytocin, which is the antidote to cortisol, to stress. We can also stimulate that in ourselves by giving ourselves like a self-hug. Often people like will do tapping. There's different tapping things that also help stimulate oxytocin. And so we can intentionally like take action to help ourselves feel better. What can I do now to help myself feel better? Maybe I need to call a friend and vent about how hard it is to have siblings that are always fighting. Maybe I need to set up some coaching sessions with somebody. Or maybe I just need to get a cup of warm tea and take a break because I've been doing a bazillion things and my body needs to just stop and rest. And I'm important too. And it's like, I give myself permission just to like slow down and just like pause and just take care of like what I want, not like everything that everyone always wants from me all the time.
Yeah. You know, I remember distinctly those three steps as you're talking about them, Diana, how all three of those were so helpful in me just being able to shift back to being more loving and kind to my kids, even when I was upset. Or, you know, like you're talking about the shame thing, and a picture that came to me was one time I was helping my daughter, Abby, when she was probably like 7, and she was doing some schoolwork, and she said, "Hey, Dad, what is a predicate?" And I remember as soon as she asked that, I thought, oh my gosh, I have no idea. What an idiot I am. How stupid can I be? My 7-year-old daughter's asking me a question I don't know the answer to. Like, all these thoughts were going so fast. You know what I said to her? I looked at her and said, "You don't know what a predicate is? Are you serious?" Like, I immediately turned all of that shame back to her, almost like in an effort to keep her from asking me questions like that in the future, because I don't want to appear stupid, you know? And after this happened for a few minutes where I'm like upset about this and annoyed at her for not knowing this answer, finally I sat next to her and just said, "Hey, honey, that was a really bad dad moment. I'm really sorry about that. I have no idea what a predicate is. Let's actually look it up." And so then we looked it up, and it was like, it turned into this moment of like connection where like I noticed, and as I reflected on it in slow motion, I was showing myself no compassion, first of all, for not knowing the answer, as if I should know all these answers. Like, why do I need to know what a predicate is? I still couldn't tell you what it is.
I don't.
But then when I was also showing her no compassion for not knowing, right? And so that's where we kind of perpetuate this lack of compassion, as if she should know the answers to all these questions, otherwise she's stupid, you know? And like, I just thought, wow, this is so sad how if I hadn't been able to shift back to this place of kindness, then I would have just perpetuated that in her mind, where she would have learned to be more and more scared to ask me questions. She would have felt like it was her job to know things all the time instead of just being curious, right? Which is really what we want to raise, right? So I just hope the listeners can hear that. That's how those moments happen in real quick time, where if you can pause and do these steps you just said, like I got mindful, then I was able then to connect with her, and that's kind of second step, understand the shame that was there, call it out, and then the third one was actually be kind. Then it didn't turn into this moment where there was like a toxic rupture. There wasn't this wound. Instead, it was like both of us got to grow in that moment, and I actually got to love myself for not knowing. You know?
Right. And was there a part of you that kind of was like, well, I'm probably not the only one that doesn't know what that is?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay, so that was the common humanity, because if you were like, well, it's hard to be self-compassionate if you're like, well, I guess I'm the only one that doesn't know what it is. Everyone else on this all the other
Yes.
8 billion people in this world know what it is, but I don't. So it's okay. I'll still be self-compassionate. It's like, no, that's really hard because I'm the only one. I'm excluded. But if you're like, wait a minute, most people don't know what this is. Why am I beating myself up?
But that's what Shane was telling me. Shane was like, Kyle, you're a 40-year-old man. You should know what a predicate is. What is your problem, right? But then, I was able to. No, that's lots of people have no idea. If I polled a bunch of people,
remembers that.
That's right. Nobody knows what this thing is.
Yeah.
And it's okay not to know, and it's okay for my daughter not to know. This is the joy of learning. This is why we want to learn together. So no, I love those 3 steps, and I just want to say to all listeners, I have done that myself. I know Sarah has.
Yes.
And it has dramatically helped not only ourselves personally, but our children be able to do that with each other as siblings too, to show each other when they are getting upset with each other, to eventually move back to those same 3 steps, to where now they're not judging each other and criticizing each other constantly, but instead showing each other compassion, because they don't hold themselves to this unrealistic standard that somehow is trying to be achieved.
Yeah. And I love how you highlighted the shame piece, because parents are in the population. Parents are a group of people that are very, very shame prone. And shame, what shame is really, shame is it's like, it doesn't happen it's not an inside job. We're not born with shame. We experience shame in relationships. So shame is somebody else's negative evaluation of us in our own head. So in our head, we are thinking that the other person, or maybe they have actually shamed us and said, like, you're no good. I don't like you. What you're doing is bad. That would be shame. But then afterward, if we integrate that into our body and we're like, okay, so when I do bad things, I need to tell myself that. And then later we're like, okay, like we kind of project this, like the brain is very like efficient at projecting into the future. And it's like, oh, if I do this person, like if I don't know what this word is, my daughter is going to think I'm stupid. And then she's really going to she might not look up to me. And then she's going to think like, I don't know anything. And why should she even listen to me? And she's just going to find somebody else to listen to. And like, oh my gosh, I just lost my daughter. And the point of shame, it's a very innocent emotion, even though it can be very toxic in behavior externally and internally. But the intent of shame, it's very innocent in that it's just a desire to be loved and belong.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Like
so
if
good.
we can think about when we feel shame, when shame comes up for you, try to reframe it to yourself that the only reason you feel shame is because you want so badly to be loved by this other person and to belong. And the shame is trying to keep you in relationship with them. Because if you can at least like sacrifice yourself and tell yourself you're bad, you can make them happy enough to be in the relationship with them. But what if it's not a win-lose? What if you can come to a win-win where they can still be in relationship with you and you can maintain your sense of goodness and lovability?
Yeah.
Because you can get to that with like self-compassion, right? Like 2 things can be true. I just made a mistake and I'm still a good person. I just yelled at my kid and I'm still a good mother. I don't know what this word is and I'm still a smart dad that I can teach her stuff, right? So 2 things can be true.
That's so good. Well, Diane, if you could take a moment to tell the listeners about the upcoming summit and what they can get from joining that or being a part of it.
Yeah, sure. So the Intentional Life and Parenting Summit is all about looking at doing things with more purpose and more intention, right? So doing things that really matter to you, whatever that is, like identifying like what is the priority for you, what is more important for you, and how can you do more of that and less of the things that aren't so important. Even if you think about like the 80-20 principle, it's like, what are the things that you really enjoy in life, that you really want to thrive in, that you want to create more space for in your life. So we talk about taking care of ourselves and like what helps us be at our best selves and how can we do more of that in our lives. We think about like our homes and there's going to be a day on like kind of how your environment around you influences like the way you live your life, right? But also show up in parenting. And so how can you be more intentional with the space that you have, but also like mentally the rooms in your head? How can you create more intentional dialogue that's actually supportive. And then we have a specific day on parenting, and then another day on supporting yourself with resources around you, which we're going to show your guys' interview on that day, where we talk about how your partner in your home is part of your support, and how you can support each other in parenting, and how you can build teamwork and help each other become the best parent that you want to be. So all things parenting and raising children, and children's big emotions and all of that, but also in the context of what is most important in your life and how can you get more of that.
Yeah, and this will be October 7th through the 12th. And it's going to be free, right? Is it a free summit?
Yes,
as well?
It's a free summit for 5 days. So everyone can register for free and watch the interviews. They're free for 24 hours, I believe. And then if they want to keep them for ongoing access, for lifetime access, they can purchase the VIP upgrade always. But
that's great. That's exciting.
Yeah. So, listeners, I hope you we will include the link to do that as it gets closer. So this episode will drop about a week or so before that. So that way you can grab a hold of that, be a part of that, get all that information totally free, which is awesome. And you're going to get so many great resources from each of the speakers. I mean, Diana's going to have over 20 speakers involved in this. And so 5 days of just really being able to get support and encouragement, and probably some more compassion on how to be the parent you are wanting to be. So just want to thank you so much, Diana, for sharing this thoughts on it. Definitely something that we needed to hear more of. And we're excited for the listeners to hear more about this as well. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
The Art of Raising Humans podcast should not be considered or used as counseling, but for educational purposes only.